Our tale from Trench Crusade today takes us to the walls of New Antioch, where the artillery never slept, and every stone had a number, a saint, and a gun laid upon it. There, among range tables, prayer flags, and the smoke of 1,000 batteries, one sergeant began receiving corrections from a tower that was not on any map. I served as a correction sergeant for the Eastern Artillery of New Antioch, and that meant I spent most of my life listening to men die before I ever saw them. That was not a poet's complaint. It was the plain nature of the work. A rifleman saw the face of the man trying to kill him. A combat engineer heard the earth shift under his boots. A trench cleric held a soldier's shoulders while he prayed through blood. But an artillery sergeant worked by distance. I received numbers, bearings, fragments of weather, scraps of signal, and the last reports of forward observers who had stayed too long in their pits because the guns behind them needed one more correction before the heretics came over. My name was Sergeant Ivo Marek, 3rd Correction Section, St. Bartholomew Artillery Battalion, Eastern Wall Command. I had been born in New Antioch, 2 streets from the old copper cisterns, in a house where the windows were never unshuttered after dusk because the glow beyond the horizon gave my mother headaches. My father loaded shells for Battery Mark for 26 years and died with both ears ruined and both lungs black, which the clerks called an honorable industrial passing. My mother sold lamp wicks to infantry families until fever took her. I grew up with wall-stone dust in my teeth and the habit of counting impacts before I counted blessings. By the time this account began, I was 38 years old, though the war made every man either younger or older than his age, and I never knew which side I had fallen on. I wore a charcoal artillery coat patched at the elbows, a steel sallet with the cheek guards removed because I needed to hear, and a rosary of brass firing primers around my wrist. I had no wife, no children, and no private room worth describing. My quarters were a narrow cell in casemate Gaul, below the eastern curtain, with a cot, a desk, a field telephone, and a painted icon of Saint Barbara, whose face had been darkened by lamp smoke until she looked less like a martyr and more like a gunner after a bad day. The St. Bartholomew Battalion occupied a length of the eastern wall between Tower 46 and Tower 51, officially. In practice, no wall sector ended where the plans said it ended. Casemates bit into one another. Saps ran under foundations. Observation galleries had been added, sealed, reopened, renamed, and consecrated so many times that a man could stand in a corridor built in the same year as his grandfather and read a tablet claiming it had been founded 200 years earlier by a duke whose bones had since been distributed among 6 shrines. New Antioch was not built so much as accumulated. It had been repaired by desperate hands, expanded by frightened kings, and strengthened by engineers who usually had shells falling on their helmets while they took measurements. Still, the city kept records. It had to. Without records, a fortress died of its own weight before the enemy touched it. Every tower had a number. Every gate had a saint. Every battery had a ledger. Every line of fire had a brass tag hanging from it in the fire direction rooms. The famous walls of New Antioch had 77 mighty towers, and every child knew that number before he knew his own letters. 77 towers, 8 great sieges, no breach. Priests used the phrase in sermons. Recruiting posters used it in red ink. Mothers said it to crying children when the guns shook the floor. 77 towers stood between mankind and the gate's long shadow. That was why the first wrong number troubled me more than the first miracle. Our routine began in darkness. At 3rd bell before dawn, the city lamps were hooded and the eastern batteries came awake with a sound like a factory learning to breathe. Steam winches coughed in the ammunition hoists. Shell carts rattled over iron decking. Powder monks from the storehouses arrived in pairs, each with blackened hands tucked into his sleeves and a tally board hung from his neck. The gun chiefs received their allotments under the supervision of clerks, clerics, and one bored sergeant from ordnance who wore a spotless gorget as if cleanliness could intimidate high explosive. My section worked in Fire Direction Room 12, a vaulted chamber under the parapet where 6 telephones hung from hooks, 3 speaking tubes ran upward to the observation slits, and a plotting table occupied the center like an altar built for geometry. The table had a zinc surface engraved with sectors, grid squares, registered targets, known enemy trench lines, suspected tunnels, ruined villages, crater fields, wire belts, and old kill zones whose numbers had been inherited from men long dead. Around it stood my people. Corporal Mara Voss kept the master ledger and could add drift, wind, elevation, and powder temperature faster than most clerks could write their own names. She had a narrow face, a permanent squint from years of lamp work, and a voice that never rose even when the ceiling dust fell into her ink. She called every gun by its baptismal name and every soldier by his surname, including me, which I took as a compliment. Corporal Toma Grigor worked the line board. He was 22, broad-shouldered, and cheerful in the stubborn way of men who had not yet understood that cheer could be rationed. He came from the lower aqueduct quarter, where families lived close enough to the water machinery that their children learned to sleep through clanging valves. Toma had a gift for hearing faults in telephone lines. He could tell the difference between a wet splice, a chewed cable, enemy induction, and a signaler trying to hide panic behind proper procedure. Lena Arendt was our youngest plotter, a yeoman seconded to us after a shell burst took 2 fingers from her left hand and made rifle drill difficult. She compensated by writing with a brass brace and made no mistakes anyone could prove. She wore a strip of blue cloth at her collar for her brother, who had gone missing with the trench moles outside St. Audrin's spur. Brother Malco served as our attached trench cleric. He was not gentle, but he was kind in the manner permitted by war. He carried a portable shrine on his back when he went above, a little iron cabinet containing a chipped icon, 3 finger bones, and a candle that refused to stay lit in shell wind. In the direction room he blessed range cards, heard confessions in the chart alcove, and watched the rest of us, as if our fatigue were a leak he meant to plug with prayer. Above us, on the wall, our eyes belonged to the observers. Some were trained artillerists. Some were sniper priests who had blinded themselves and nevertheless called targets with impossible calm. Some were ordinary soldiery of New Antioch wedged into towers, galleries, listening pits, or crow's nests, their reports shaking through wire and tube while the heretic batteries tried to find them. We rarely met the men whose voices ruled our mornings. That distance helped, until it did not. A normal firing day followed a grammar as strict as liturgy. The observer identified himself. He gave his tower or pit, then his sector, then target description. We checked it against the morning board. Mara calculated the initial lay. Lena moved brass pins across the table. I confirmed charge and fuse. Toma repeated the order to the battery exchange. The guns replied with readiness, one by one. Brother Malco crossed himself. I gave the word. Then the wall spoke. No one who has not stood inside a fortress battery understands how a gun becomes part of a building. Field guns jump, buck, and tear themselves backward like frightened animals. Wall guns are different. Their recoil passes through cradle, pintle, bedstone, gallery, buttress, and deep foundation until the whole city seems to accept the shot into its bones. In Fire Direction Room 12, each discharge arrived as a blow from inside the earth. Dust fell. Lamp flames flattened. The zinc table hummed beneath my palms. Somewhere above, shells rose over the parapet toward the dead land, carrying our arithmetic with them. After that came correction. Short 200, right 50. Fire for adjustment. Over 100, left 25. Repeat. Target walking. Add 300. Fuse quick. Battery 6. That was the work. We killed by amendment. We turned failure into accuracy, one correction at a time. A shell short by 200 yards was a warning sent to the wrong patch of mud. A shell corrected onto a forming assault column was 1,000 lives bought in the city behind us. Every number mattered. Every voice mattered. Every wrong digit had weight. The morning of the first wrong number began with fog. Fog outside New Antioch did not behave like honest weather. It crawled in from the crater country and gathered in the hollows as if it had been poured there from bowls. It smelled faintly of hot stone and vinegar. The wind flags along the eastern parapet hung limp, though the smoke above the heretic lines drifted north in long black scarves. Visibility from the ordinary slits was poor, but the upper stations could still read movement where the fog thinned against the ridges. At fourth bell, Tower 49 reported labor parties near Grid Enoch 7. We fired 3 ranging shells from Battery Judith, corrected twice, and scattered them before they could lay boards across the mud. At fourth bell and 16, Pit Lazarus called a suspected mortar train, and we broke it with airbursts, though the observer died before he could confirm final effect. His last transmission was a wet cough and the word good, which Mara entered in the ledger because good was a valid effect if it came from the observer before the line went dead. At fifth bell, the fog brightened from within. That was never a good sign. Toma heard the first change through line 2 and lifted one hand. "New station calling," he said. I looked up from the powder table. "Which station?" He pressed the receiver harder against his ear. "Signal bell pattern unknown. Strong line. Very strong." Mara stopped writing. Unknown stations did not call Fire Direction Room 12. Signals were routed by exchange through assigned lines. An observer could patch through from a damaged field cable, but the exchange logged the transfer. A forward party could call on emergency wire, but there were challenge phrases for that, and most emergency lines sounded like rain inside a coffin. This line sounded clear enough that I could hear the faint tick of Toma's earpiece from across the room. "Put him through the horn," I said. Toma threw the brass switch. A voice entered the room. "Correction station, attend." It was a man's voice, old but not weak. The accent belonged to New Antioch, though not to any quarter I recognized. Each word came measured, scraped clean of urgency, as if the speaker had spent years learning how not to waste breath. I took the speaking horn. "This is Fire Direction 12, Sergeant Marek. Identify your station." "Tower 78, eastern face, sanctified high slit." Lena's pencil paused in its brass brace. Mara looked at me without expression. I said, "Repeat station." "Tower 78, eastern face, sanctified high slit. Prepare Battery Judith, Battery Mark, Battery Cosmos. Target massing in dead ground behind St. Bellon Ridge, bearing 084 from my face. Range 4,900. Elevation table old pattern. Add 30 for morning density. Fuse delay 2. Fire by half battery." No one moved for half a second. There was no Tower 78. There were 77 towers. Tower 77 stood on the far northern horn where the wall bent toward the salt flats. The eastern face, where we served, held towers in the 40s and 50s. The numbering was public, sacred, drilled into every recruit and printed on every wall map. A man claiming Tower 78 might as well have claimed to be calling from the moon. But the target description was precise, and St. Bellon Ridge had worried me for 3 days. The ridge was not much to look at on the map. A broken line of pale stone, a shattered chapel, 3 old shell craters, and a fold of ground hidden from most direct slits. Heretic labor had been probing there under fog. We had fired nuisance patterns whenever we saw movement, but the dead ground behind the ridge remained a blind pocket. If an assault column formed there, we would see it only when it came over the crest, and by then the eastern approach would already be full of teeth. Mara leaned close to the board. "Bearing from which face?" "He gave 084 from his face," Lena whispered. "He has no face," Mara said. Toma covered the horn. "Exchange does not show the line. It is not on the board." Brother Malco murmured a prayer under his breath. The voice returned, perfectly calm. "You are losing minutes." I had been an artillery sergeant long enough to distrust both miracles and hesitation. I checked the requested range against 3 known stations. If a hypothetical tower existed east by northeast of our sector, higher than the curtain, with line of sight over St. Bellon Ridge, the correction might make sense. If it did not, we would waste 12 shells into fog and receive a reprimand sharp enough to cut paper. 12 shells weighed less than an assault column. "Battery Judith," I said. "Half battery. Bearing 084 adjusted to ridge grid. Range 4,900. Add 30. Fuse delay 2, Battery Mark and Cosmos hold ready. Fire for effect pending observation." Mara's eyes flicked to me, but she wrote. The order went out. The ready lamps answered. I gave the word. Battery Judith fired 4 guns. The chamber shook. Dust fell in a soft curtain over the plotting table. We waited through the seconds of flight, counting by habit, each of us silently adjusting for elevation and damp powder. The voice said, "Impact. Correct. Battery mark add 20 range. Cosmos left 40. Fire now." Before I could ask for effect, another voice burst over line 3 from Tower 49, shouting so loudly the horn crackled. "Heretic column exposed behind Belon. By God, they are packed shoulder to shoulder. You struck their head. Fire! Fire everything!" That settled the matter. We fired everything. For 11 minutes, the eastern wall became thunder. Battery Judith walked shells behind the ridge. Battery Mark dropped delay fuses into the fold. Cosmos opened with shrapnel timed low. Tower 49 corrected until its line failed. Pit Magdalene took over. Then the unknown station from Tower 78 gave 3 corrections so small and perfect that Mara stopped checking them before passing them on. Left 15. Repeat 100 short, quick fuse. Cut the rear. They are turning. When the fog finally tore open, the ground behind St. Bellin Ridge looked as if a giant hand had crushed a black insect nest into the mud. Later estimates said 3 heretic battalions had been forming there, with scaling engines, trench shields, mule carts, and 2 demon-bound mortars under canvas. If they had crested the ridge under fog, they would have reached the outer wire before our lower observers understood the scale of the assault. The eastern curtain might have held. It might not. Those are the phrases official reports use when no one wants to calculate the dead. We saved thousands that morning. No one congratulated us. In New Antioch, averted disaster was filed as routine unless it was useful for morale. Lieutenant Aurelian sent a runner with a written commendation for prompt response under uncertain signal conditions, which was command language for "do not do it again unless it works again." Ordnance requested shell expenditure justifications. Signals requested the unknown station's line origin. The chaplaincy requested a copy of the transmission. Wall registry requested that I stop writing Tower 78 in the station column because there was no such station and false records created false liabilities. Mara changed the ledger entry to unverified high observation source in red ink. Then, below it, so small I almost missed it, she wrote 78. The next day, the non-existent tower called again. It did not call during quiet. That was the first pattern. It called only when we were about to miss something that mattered. At second bell afternoon, heretic guns began a ragged bombardment against the old quarry road. The shells were poor, many falling short, some bursting in air from bad fuses. We thought it was harassment. Battery Cosmos prepared counter-battery fire against the visible flashes near the dead olive groves. The clear line opened before we fired. "Do not answer the grove," said the voice. "False battery, smoke pots and mirror plates, true guns under the collapsed hospice, grid Cyril 4. Set delay deep, Mark 1st, Judith 2nd, Cosmos reserve." We checked. The collapsed hospice had been a ruin for 80 years. Our maps marked it as rubble too shallow to cover anything larger than a goat. Tower 50 reported no movement there. Pit Lazarus was dead. No other station saw what the voice claimed. I ordered 1 ranging shell from Mark. It landed in the hospice ruin. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the ground opened and spat flame. A magazine cooked beneath the stones, and the entire ruin lifted like a lid from a boiling pot. Through the smoke we saw wheels, gun trails, twisted barrels, and figures running with their coats on fire. Mara made the ledger correction without waiting for me. On the 3rd day, the voice saved a relief column on the south approach by warning us that the dust cloud behind it was not wind, but fast-moving cavalry screened by ash. On the 4th, it identified a sapper tunnel by the way puddles trembled near an abandoned shrine. On the 5th, it redirected a planned bombardment away from decoy trenches and onto a concealed reserve line packed with ladders. Each time, the station named itself the same way: Tower 78, Eastern Face, Sanctified High Slit. Each time, the line came through clear as chapel glass. Each time, no exchange logged it. By the end of the week, men who had never entered Fire Direction Room 12 knew about our ghost observer. Gunners painted a small black number 78 on the breech of Judith's fourth gun. Powder monks began touching the telephone conduit before they delivered charges. One of the sniper priests from Tower 50, a blind woman named Sister Calanthe, asked to listen to the line and stood with the receiver against her veiled ear for 1 full minute after the voice ended. "Well?" I asked her. She handed the receiver back. Her eye sockets had been sewn shut with white thread. Her face remained still, but her fingers were trembling. "He was looking from somewhere high," she said. "There is no somewhere high on that bearing." "There was when he looked." I disliked that answer enough to remember it. The investigation began formally after the Feast of St. Romuald, when the ghost station corrected a barrage onto a heretic flame engine before it came into sight of any registered observer. The engine had been crawling through a drainage fold under sheets of hammered iron, escorted by men in lacquered masks. We hit it with Greek fire shells from a high-arc mortar battery and turned half the fold into a furnace. The smoke rose green and greasy. For an hour afterward, things screamed inside it that did not sound like horses, men, or machinery. Lieutenant Aurelian summoned me to Wall Command that evening. He occupied an office inside Tower 48, though occupied was too comfortable a word. The room had 4 maps, 2 field telephones, a cot he never unfolded, and a window slit aimed at the eastern deadland. Aurelian was a tall man with the waxy complexion of soldiers who lived under stone. His right hand had been replaced by an iron clamp after the 7th siege, and he used it to hold papers flat while he read. Sergeant Hest, signals, stood beside him. She was all angles, sharp nose, sharp shoulders, sharp little spectacles balanced on the bridge of a face that had not smiled since before I earned my first stripes. Beside her waited Castigator Audrin of the Wall Chaplaincy, a heavy, expressionless man with a black beard. A combat engineer corporal named Sabella Kreutz leaned against the back wall, helmet under one arm, clay still drying on her boots. Aurelian did not waste time. "Sergeant Marek, how many times has the unregistered station contacted your room?" 9 confirmed transmissions, sir. 3 suspected partials." "Accuracy?" "Perfect where verified. Useful where not." Sergeant Hest made a noise like a pen nib snapping. "No station is perfect." "No registered station," I said before caution could stop me. Aurelian looked at me, then at the wall map. "There are 77 towers." "Yes, sir." "Say the rest." "The station identifies as Tower 78, eastern face, sanctified high slit." Castigator Audrin crossed himself, but slowly, as if not wishing to be seen doing it. Sergeant Hest opened a folder. "There is no line. There is no exchange path. There is no voltage record, no patch, no relay inscription, and no maintenance permit for any conduit carrying these calls. I had the lower signal galleries checked. The wire enters your room through the ordinary Line 2 harness during transmission and vanishes from the circuit after. That is not a metaphor. The galvanometer registers load while the call is active. Then nothing." Corporal Kreutz said, "A hidden military line could be buried in old masonry." "It could," Hest said, "if hidden military lines appeared and disappeared according to liturgical whim." Aurelian tapped the map with his iron clamp. "Corporal Kreutz will inspect the wall fabric. Sergeant Hest will trace the impossible wire. Castigator Audrin will determine whether this is a blessing, a deception, or something that requires hammers and fire. You, Marek, will accompany them." I had expected discipline, not assignment. "Because the voice speaks to my room?" "Because you answered it," Aurelian said. "And because if it calls again, you seem willing to risk your career on useful numbers. That quality is dangerous but not currently expendable." I accepted because refusing would have been pointless, and because part of me wanted to see the place from which the impossible corrections came. Curiosity is not always a sin, but in New Antioch it often stood near enough to sin that the church kept an eye on it. We began with records. Wall registry lived beneath the Duke's old mint in a series of cold vaults whose shelves held the fortress in paper form. Plans, amendments, repairs, consecrations, condemnations, load reports, shrine inventories, casualty tablets, drainage rights, powder licenses, tower censuses, tower renumberings after collapses, disputes between artillery and infantry over stair usage, and one entire cabinet devoted to complaints about bells. If a stone in New Antioch had been moved, someone had written a reason, charged a department, and argued over the ink. The registry clerks disliked us immediately. Soldiers brought mud. Engineers brought questions. Clerics brought authority. Signal troops brought requests for documents that had been misfiled by dead men during sieges. We brought all four. For 2 days we searched tower plans. The official eastern wall sequence was clear. Tower 46, St. Grigor's Bastion. Tower 47, the Anvil Casemate. Tower 48, Tower 49, Tower 50, Tower 51, St. Leonti's Spur, and onward. No 78. No missing number. No erased tower in the index. No unusual gap in the foundation drawings. But gaps in New Antioch hid behind abundance. There were too many repairs, too many emergency works, too many overlapping drafts from too many centuries. Corporal Kreutz found the first inconsistency in a load-bearing survey dated 1612. She spread the brittle sheet under a glass weight and pointed with a cracked fingernail. "Here, see the buttress spacing." I saw lines. Engineers always expected other people to see gilt in lines. She explained anyway. Between 49 and 50, the curtain run is listed as 187 paces in the modern survey. Older drawings give 231. That is not settlement. That is missing length. Sergeant Hest adjusted her spectacles. Or a changed pace standard? Not by 44 paces. Castigator Odrin asked, "Could a tower have been demolished?" "A tower does not vanish from a wall without rubble, replacement, and a century of clerks arguing over cost," Kreutz said. "But something in the wall accounts for weight that the visible wall does not carry. The stress tables make room for a mass that is not there." She sounded almost offended, as if the fortress had lied personally to her profession. That night, the station called again. I was not in Fire Direction Room 12. Mara took the call and sent a runner so fast he arrived at the registry vault unable to speak. We followed him at a run through 3 stairwells and a chapel passage where wounded men slept on stretchers between saints painted on the floor. By the time I reached the direction room, the bombardment had begun without me. Mara stood over the table, hair coming loose from its pins, issuing corrections with the receiver wedged between shoulder and ear. "Battery Judith, repeat last. Cosmos, add 50. Mark, cease 2 guns for cooling, continue with 1 and 3. She saw me and pointed to the horn. The voice filled the room. "Their left is folding. Do not pursue with fire. Wait for second wave. They have chained prisoners under the smoke." I took the horn. "Tower 78, this is Marek. Confirm prisoners." "Confirmed. Faithful captives. 30 or more. Bound to frames, used as markers. Do not waste shells on them. Let them pass the first crater, then fire behind." I looked at Mara. She had already marked the adjustment. Outside, enemy smoke spread across no man's land in low yellow banks. Through Tower 49's intermittent reports, we learned the heretics had driven captives ahead of their assault, each tied upright to a frame of pale wood with lanterns hung from their necks. In fog and smoke, the lanterns mimicked command signals. A panicked observer might have ranged on them, killing the prisoners and leaving the assault wave untouched behind. The ghost station walked our shells over the captives and onto the true wave with surgical patience. Afterward, when stretcher parties brought in 11 survivors cut from the frames, one asked who had spared them. A yeoman told him St. Barbara. Another said the guns themselves had grown eyes. Brother Malco, who had seen our faces in the direction room, said nothing. The next morning, we went into the wall. Corporal Kreutz led us through maintenance ways that ordinary soldiers never used. We entered below Tower 49 through a hatch behind a broken statue of St. Hadrian, descended a ladder slick with mineral sweat, and followed a brick conduit where hot pipes ran beside telephone bundles wrapped in tarred cloth. The air smelled of dust, old oil, and the sour breath of too many men living above too little drainage. Kreutz brought 2 combat engineers, Corporal Pell, who carried a pneumatic drill and had the calm, blank face of a man who trusted tools more than prayers, and Private Jack Nemeth, who was small enough to fit into gaps designed by medieval masons with no love for future soldiers. Sergeant Hest brought signal test gear in a padded satchel. Castigator Odran brought a censer, a reliquary hammer, and 3 folded warrants permitting spiritual intrusion into sealed works. I brought my sidearm, a notebook, and the uneasy awareness that none of my artillery training had prepared me for crawling after a telephone line that officially did not exist. We traced Line 2 from Fire Direction Room 12 backward into the signal harness. For most of its length it behaved. Copper pair, linen wrap, pitch seal. Junction tags from the last maintenance rotation. Then, 30 paces below the plotting room, behind a service niche filled with broken insulators, Hest's galvanometer twitched. She crouched. There. I saw only a damp wall. Pell scraped lichen away with a knife. Under it lay a seam in the stone, hair thin and black. Nemeth fitted a listening cone against it. His grin faded. "There's space beyond," he said. Kreutz ran her hand along the blocks. "This wall has been refaced. Poorly hidden, well done. Old work behind new skin." Castigator Odran lifted his censer. The smoke moved toward the seam and vanished through it, though I felt no draft. The warrant allowed breaking sealed masonry if 3 conditions were met: military necessity, engineering safety, and clerical assent. We had all 3, though none of us said aloud that curiosity was doing most of the pushing. Pell drilled 4 holes. The sound hammered down the conduit until my teeth ached. Nemeth set wedges. Kreutz tapped them in sequence. The refacing slab came loose with a sigh, like a breath held too long. Behind it was a narrow stair, not a rough gap, not a forgotten drain. A stair, cut from dark stone, rising at an angle that did not match the visible wall. Dust lay on the steps so thick it had cracked into plates. On the left-hand wall ran a copper wire black with age, fixed by ceramic knobs shaped like tiny skulls. On the right were painted numbers, almost erased. Lena, who had come as my extra hand and refused to stay behind, leaned close with her lamp. 78, she whispered. The numerals had been painted in red, not Arabic figures, not the modern registry hand, but old military tallies, 7 strokes crossed by 7, then 8 points arranged around a central dot. Above them, flaking badly, were the words, "Sanctified High Access." Sergeant Hest did not speak for some time. Corporal Kreutz smiled without pleasure. "There is your changed pace standard." We climbed. The stair was too narrow for comfort and too steep for speed. It rose inside thickness that should not have existed. Twice we passed arrow slits bricked from the outside. Once we found a landing with 3 empty oil jars arranged neatly beside a rusted bucket. No footprints marked the dust except ours. No rat droppings, no insect husks. Nothing had lived in that stair for a very long time, and yet the wire on the wall hummed faintly when Hest touched it with her tester. Halfway up, Brother Malco stopped. He had been praying under his breath since we entered. Now his words failed. I turned with my lamp. "Brother?" He stared at the wall. There, beneath the dust, someone had scratched tally marks into the stone. At first I thought they recorded days. Then I realized no man could have scratched that many days unless he had been born with a chisel in his fist. The marks covered the wall in bands, hundreds upon hundreds, then thousands, crossed, grouped, resumed, interrupted by prayers, names, fragments of psalms, firing data, weather notes, and one repeated line. "Hold until relieved." Castigator Odran pressed his lips together. The phrase belonged to military orders, not scripture. Seeing it carved like a prayer made it worse. We continued upward. The temperature changed near the top. The lower wall had been warm from pipes and men and machinery. The stair grew cold enough that my breath smoked. The stone became older. The mortar between blocks glittered with flecks of shell, bone, and green glass. The sound of the city faded behind us until even the guns seemed distant. Then the stair ended at an iron door. It stood twice a man's height and was built not to keep enemies out, but to keep something in sacred order. Reliefs covered it, wheels, eyes, towers, flames, and a figure kneeling inside a box of spikes. Across the lintel someone had engraved, "Anchorite of the Eastern Void, beneath Tower 78, no entry save by ducal warrant, wall prior, and immediate need." The third line had been struck through. Below it, in a different hand, were the words, "Immediate need is continual." No one laughed. The wall did not permit laughter there. Beside the door was a speaking grill connected to the old copper wire. Sergeant Hest examined it with reverence despite herself. The grill's mesh was tarnished black. A small brass plate below it bore a station designation, still legible. Tower 78, high slit, eastern face. Corporal Kreutz touched the door hinges. "This is not part of the visible wall." "What is above us?" I asked. She looked uncomfortable. "According to the maps, air. According to my feet, a tower." Castigator Odran lifted the reliquary hammer. "We announce ourselves." He struck the plate 3 times. The sound did not echo down the stair. It went inward, deep and dull. For a while nothing happened. Then the grill breathed. "Correction station. Attend." It was the same voice, but without the telephone's clean distance, it sounded older, drier, and painfully close. I stepped forward. "This is Sergeant Marek. I have attended. You should not have climbed. You gave us a station. I gave you corrections. The station was not for you." Castigator Odran spoke with formal authority. "In the name of the Church and the Duke of New Antioch, identify yourself." The voice paused. "Brother Observer Enoch Vardan, Anchorite of the Eastern Void, Tower 78, held under vow, wall order, and debt." Audran's face changed at the name. Not recognition exactly, but the shock of a man hearing a dead language answer him. Sergeant Hest said, "There is no Tower 78. From behind the door came a sound like dry cloth shifting over metal. "There is when I hold it." The sensible part of me wanted to retreat then. We had found the source. We could report, seal, classify, and return to the ordinary insanity of war. But the artilleryman's part of me, the part that could not leave an unplotted gun on a flank, needed the geometry. "What are you observing?" I asked. "The gap," he said. The word entered the stair and made the lamp seem smaller. Corporal Kreutz moved closer. "What gap?" "The one the wall forgot it had. The one the enemy has not been permitted to see. The one beneath your maps, between 49 and 50, where stone should have continued and did not." Kreutz whispered something profane. Brother Malco raised his portable shrine slightly, as if shielding his chest. "The walls have never been breached." "No," said Enoch Vardan. "They were never breached. They were incomplete." That was worse. A breached wall had once been whole. An incomplete wall meant the flaw had been born with it. Castigator Odran recovered first. "Explain." The anchorite breathed through the grill. Each breath rasped with a faint mechanical undertone, like bellows worked by a tired hand. When the eastern curtain was raised after the old city's death, the ground beneath this reach would not hold stone. Every foundation sank, every arch cracked. Men blamed ash, demon essence, bad lime, sabotage, secret sin. They drove piles, they poured lead, they sang offices day and night. The gap remained, not visible at first, not to ordinary eyes. The wall stood when watched from within and failed when watched from without. Heretic scouts found angles where they could see through what our masons swore was solid. 3 assaults came to that place before the first siege was named. Each was turned back at impossible cost. No one interrupted him. The Sword Congress sent engineers, the church sent exorcists, the Duke sent prisoners to dig until their hands burst. At last the wall prior ordered an anchorite foundation, not a walking shrine, not a battle engine, a sealed observer, a man awake at the point of failure, sworn to perceive the missing tower until perception became structure. Sacred geometry, relic calculus, diesel pumps, prayer wheels, pain. The mind can be made into a buttress if it is prevented from dreaming. The soul can hold a line if every exit is nailed shut. Sergeant Hest said very softly, "That is impossible." "Yes," said Enoch Vardan. "That was why it worked." The stair seemed to tilt under me. I thought of the load reports making room for absent mass, the changed curtain length, the perfect sightlines. I thought of the line that appeared only when he spoke. I thought of a man, or what remained of one, staring outward for longer than nations lasted. Castigator Odrin gripped the reliquary hammer until his knuckles whitened. "How long have you been sealed?" "Since the wall was made true." "Give years." The answer took time. "I stopped trusting the Count after the 2nd century." Lena made a small sound behind me. I wanted to doubt him. Doubt would have been clean, but the wall around us had already testified in dust, wire, and hidden stair. The official 77 towers stood because somewhere outside the official count, an 80-year-old lie had become a 300-year miracle or a 300-year crime. "Why call now?" I asked. "Because I am tired." The words were not dramatic. They were not pleading. They were a report, like range 4,900, add 30 for morning density. Brother Malco stepped forward. "Brother Enoch, your vigil has saved the city. Hold fast. We will bring relief. We will bring the wall prior. We will bring physicians." Behind the door, something clicked in a slow, irregular rhythm. "No relief was written. Only hold." Castigator Odrin said, "The church does not abandon its faithful servants." The anchorite's laugh was almost silent. "Then I have not been faithful enough to be found." We left because there was nothing else to do and because a heretic bombardment began while we were still on the stair. It arrived from batteries we had not registered. By the time we reached Fire Direction Room 12, Mara had already taken a call from Tower 78 and had begun firing according to its corrections. She looked at my face once and asked no questions. For the next week, our investigation ran in 2 directions at once, downward into records and upward toward a door no one wished to open. The records confirmed enough to damn everyone and not enough to satisfy anyone. We found a sealed appendix in a Foundation ledger from 1563 referencing Eastern Void accommodation. We found a requisition for copper wire, sanctified oil, wakefulness stimulants, surgical restraints, and 1 volunteer penitent of military education. We found a chaplain's note naming Brother Observer Enoch Vardan, formerly Sergeant Enoch Vardan, artillery surveyor, convicted of abandoning his post during the Ashen Alarm and reprieved for perpetual corrective service. We found no death record. We found no relief schedule. We found 3 later inspection forms with the same sentence copied by different hands over the centuries. Anchorite responsive, wall true, no action required. The last inspection had taken place 112 years before I was born. Corporal Kreutz examined the hidden tower from every reachable side and emerged furious. Her fury comforted me because it was practical. "They built around a wound," she said in Aurelian's office. "Not over it, around it. The visible masonry between 49 and 50 is a mask tied into adjacent towers. It carries patrol weight, light guns, and parapet decking, but not siege load. Behind it, where mass should be, there is discontinuity. If the anchorite's account is true, the perceived tower provides alignment, compression, and concealment. If he fails, we may not merely lose a lookout. We may discover we have been standing beside an opening wide enough for an army." Sergeant Hest placed her report on the desk. "The signal mechanism depends on him. The copper line has no stable path when he is silent. I cannot maintain it, reinforce it, or duplicate it because it does not exist continuously enough to work on. Castigator Audron had grown older in a week. Theologically, the matter is irregular. Aurelian stared at him. Audron amended, gravely irregular. Is it holy? Aurelian asked. The castigator looked toward the narrow window. Shell flashes flickered beyond it like heat lightning. It has protected the faithful. It was built with prayer. It has also kept a living soul in torment beyond any permitted penance. Holiness does not excuse every instrument used in its name. Aurelian turned to me. And you, Marek? I had no report, only the memory of a voice saying I am tired. He sees things we cannot, I said. He has saved every sector he has touched, but he is failing. How do you know? His corrections are still perfect. His timing is not. The first calls came before crisis. The last two came after enemy movement had already begun. He is waiting longer because speech costs him, or because holding the tower costs him more than observation. The lieutenant's iron clamp tightened on the desk edge. Can we reinforce the sector without revealing the flaw? Kreutz answered. Quietly. Some. Enough? No. To build a real replacement curtain, I need labor. Cranes, foundation crews, protective bombardments, and 3 months during which the heretics politely look elsewhere. If we start, they will understand before the first week ends. Can we relieve him with another anchorite? Castigator Audron shut his eyes. Sergeant Hest said, even if such a right were permitted, which I assume it is not, we do not possess the original apparatus, and we do not understand the mechanism. The apparatus is behind the door, Aurelian said. No one liked that. Orders came from above Wall Command 2 days later, sealed with the Duke's military signet and the Wall Chaplaincy's black wax. They were written in the language bureaucracies use when they mean to make a sin look like procedure. A survey party would enter the anchorite of the Eastern Void Chamber. The purpose? Assess viability of relief, repair, or replacement. The shrine would not be disturbed beyond immediate necessity. The occupant would be examined. Any threat to wall integrity would be reported without delay. Operational secrecy was absolute. False rumors regarding non-existent tower numerations would be punished under siege law. I read the order 3 times. Mara watched me from across the plotting table. You're going up. Yes. Do you want me to say don't? Would you mean it? She dipped her pen. No. I want the numbers. That was why I trusted her. The night before we opened the shrine, Tower 78 called during a lull. I was alone in the direction room except for Brother Malco, who slept sitting upright against the wall with his shrine straps still on. The lamps had been trimmed low. Above us, the guns cooled with little ticking sounds. The city beyond the casemate murmured in its uneasy sleep. Carts, distant engines, a baby crying somewhere in the infantry quarters, a hymn from a ward where amputations had run late. Line 2 rang once. I lifted the receiver. Marek. You will come tomorrow, Enoch Vardan said. I did not ask how he knew. Yes. With a priest, an engineer, a signal woman, and fear. Yes. Do not let them call me saint. The request struck me harder than I expected. I won't. Do not let them call me corrupted either. Men prefer those 2 boxes. Saint, monster. Both keep them from seeing the man they used. I sat down slowly. What do you want us to call you? For the first time, the voice hesitated like an ordinary human voice. Enoch would be kind. I looked at St. Barbara's smoke-black face and found no instruction there. Enoch, I said, what do you want? The line filled with the faint mechanical rasp of his breathing. To close my eyes without killing everyone behind me. There was no soldier's answer to that. No range table, no correction, no wording in any manual. We're trying to find another way. I know. I have listened to men try for centuries. They always sound most hopeful before they choose the old cruelty again. I don't command this." "No, you only answered. That is why I called you." The lamp between us guttered, though there was no wind. "Why did you start calling now?" I asked. "After all these years, why us?" "Because the enemy changed its prayers. They have begun to feel absence. Not see. Feel. Their scouts halt before the dead ground and tilt their heads like dogs at a door. Their guns test angles that should not interest them. Their sappers dig toward nothing. Something among them remembers there is no tower. I could once press that memory flat. Now it rises when I sleep, and I have begun to sleep while awake. I gripped the receiver until the brass warmed in my hand. "How long do we have?" "You asked as an artilleryman. Good. Not long. Less if you open the door badly. Less if you leave it shut and pretend mercy can be postponed forever." Brother Malco stirred in sleep and whispered a prayer. "What happens if you die?" The truth resumes. Can the truth be delayed? All of New Antioch is delayed truth, Sergeant. That is what a fortress is. Stone telling death to come back later. The line clicked once, softly. "When you enter, do not touch the left wheel. Do not sever the crown wires. If my mouth cannot speak, read the mirror. If the tower begins to thin, fire every gun at the eastern gap before the enemy understands what it has seen." Enoch. Correction station. Rest. The line went dead. I did not sleep. At dawn, we climbed with a party of 12. Corporal Kreutz led, followed by Pell and Nemeth with tools. Sergeant Hest came next with 2 signal assistants. Castigator Odran brought Brother Malco and a young acolyte whose hands shook around the holy water flask. I came with Mara, because I refused to enter a place of artillery observation without the best ledger keeper in the battalion. Lieutenant Aurelian did not come. Line commanders rarely enter rooms where all choices become unforgivable. He remained below with authority to fire, seal, or deny our existence as circumstances required. Lena wanted to come. I ordered her to stay. She looked at me as if I had mistaken obedience for safety, but she stayed. At the iron door, Castigator Odran read the warrant. His voice echoed strangely, as if the stair behind us had lengthened. When he finished, Corporal Kreutz inspected the hinges, locking bars, and pressure seals. The door had not been opened in living memory. It had perhaps not been opened since it was closed. "If this is load-bearing in ways I do not understand," she said, "opening it could be foolish." "If it were not foolish," Sergeant Hest said, "they would have sent clerks." Kreutz almost smiled. We began. Pell cut the outer seal with a heated blade. The wax was black and brittle, stamped so many times that the marks overlapped into a single scar. Brother Malco sang the litany of steadfast works in a low voice. Hest clipped a temporary line to the brass grill. Mara stood beside me with ledger open, as if the universe might behave if properly recorded. When the last seal broke, the door exhaled. The smell was not rot. I had prepared myself for rot. It was older and stranger. Hot metal, rancid chrism, stale breath, dried blood, machine oil, old incense, and the mineral cold of deep stone. It was the smell of a chapel that had been used as an engine room and never aired. The hinges resisted. Pell and Nemeth worked the pry bars. Kreutz called pressure in small increments. The door opened by inches, each movement producing a groan that I felt in my ribs. Darkness appeared beyond it. Not ordinary darkness. It seemed arranged. Castigator Odran raised his lantern. The chamber inside was round, narrow, and impossibly tall. Its walls were lined with iron ribs that climbed into shadow and met somewhere above in a crown of lenses, mirrors, wires, and prayer wheels. Slits opened in the stone at different heights, each covered by crystal plates smoked black at the edges. Through them I glimpsed not the familiar eastern deadland from our visible towers, but angles I had never seen. The back of St. Bellon Ridge, the hidden folds behind the hospice ruin, the drainage lines below the enemy's forward trench, the long ash road where reserves moved under netting. The chamber looked out from a point that did not belong to the wall and yet commanded everything we had failed to see. In the center stood the anchorite shrine. It was not like the walking shrines I had seen with trench pilgrim processions, those colossal suits of machine armor striding under icons and chains. This was older, built as a seated cage of iron, brass, bone, and stone. It resembled a confessional welded to a gun mount, or a reliquary designed by a torturer who understood optics. A high-backed frame held a man upright before a cluster of sighting mirrors. Wheels and weighted chains connected his arms, neck, eyelids, and spine to mechanisms set into the floor. Tubes entered his ribs. Wires crowned his skull. A band of silver script circled his brow, each letter biting into flesh that should have healed or failed long ago. For one terrible moment I thought the shrine was empty and that the voice had belonged to the machine. Then the man inside moved his eyes. He was not a corrupted saint. He was not a demon. He was not a glorious martyr shining with impossible endurance. He was a living, ruined man. His skin had the color of old parchment stretched over a frame. His beard had grown in white wisps around tubes and metal restraints, then been cut, regrown, and cut again by devices whose little blades were dark with age. His hands were open on iron rests, fingers bent into the shape of permanent calculation. His eyelids had been pinned by fine hooks to keep them from closing fully. The eyes beneath were clouded, red-rimmed, and awake. Awake. After 300 years, awake. Mara made a sound I had never heard from her and closed the ledger. Castigator Odran lowered his lantern. Whatever words he had prepared died before they became ceremony. The anchorite's lips cracked apart. "Too much light," he whispered. Brother Malco moved first. He stepped forward and shaded the lantern with his hand. "Enoch," I said. The ruined man's eyes found me through the apparatus. I do not know how. Perhaps he recognized my voice. Perhaps he had always known where each of us stood. "Sergeant," he breathed. "You came carefully. Thank you." Sergeant Hest approached the left side of the shrine, then stopped when I caught her sleeve. "Not the left wheel," I said. She stared at me, then withdrew her hand. Corporal Kreutz circled slowly, face pale beneath the grime. "This frame is tied into the wall, into the tower, into something beyond both, the load indicators. God preserve us." Pell whispered, "Can we get him out?" No one answered. Castigator Aldrin forced himself forward. "Brother Enoch Vardan, I am Castigator Odran of the Wall Chaplaincy. I have come to assess your condition and provide rights." Enoch's mouth trembled. It might have been amusement. "Late." The castigator flinched as if struck. Brother Malco leaned close. "What do you need?" "Water, though it will not help. Silence, though you cannot give it. Truth, if your offices still permit any." The acolyte began to cry without sound. Mara opened the ledger again. Her hand shook once, then steadied. "Do you wish your statement recorded?" Enoch's eyes moved to her. "Yes." So Mara recorded him. He spoke in fragments because each breath had to be borrowed from machinery that resented the debt. He told us he had been 29 when sealed. A sergeant of artillery survey, disgraced during an alarm when he withdrew a crew from an observation post without orders. The post had been destroyed minutes later. His men lived. The court judged that the lives saved did not absolve the disobedience because the withdrawal had blinded a battery at a critical hour. He accepted penance believing it would last a year, perhaps 10. He remembered the wall prior placing a hand on his head. He remembered needles. He remembered the first time the missing tower appeared around him, pale as breath, and the first heretic scouts turning away because their minds found stone where their eyes should have found absence. He remembered every siege. Not as history books remembered them with banners, dates, and named heroes, but as angles of approach, shell shortages, weather, false dawns, and the exact number of times men outside the wall had nearly looked through him. He had watched generations of gunners learn and die. He had corrected batteries whose names were later given to streets. He had listened to hymns change language. He had heard bells recast, towers renamed, dukes crowned, dukes buried, and children taught that the wall had 77 towers because no one living wished to count the one made from a man's refusal to sleep. At first, he whispered, they visited. Priests, engineers, soldiers. They changed oil, read psalms, asked what I saw, told me relief was being prepared. Then visits became inspections, then inspections became knocks, then knocks became forms, then silence. The wall remained true, so no action was required. Castigator Odrin bowed his head. Enoch continued, do not hate them too easily. Each man who postponed mercy had a reason. A bombardment, a siege, a shortage, a superior order. A fear that opening the chamber would reveal what their predecessors had done. Cowardice rarely arrived dressed as cowardice. It wore duty almost every time. That sentence stayed with me more than any horror in the room. Sergeant Hest had been tracing the signal assembly with her eyes. Your calls reached us only recently. Why not before? The old circuits failed. I learned to make new ones by remembering where wire wished to be. It took time. Remembering wire, she said. Everything in a fortress remembers its purpose if someone suffers near it long enough. Hest had no answer. Then the eastern slits brightened, not with dawn. Dawn had already come. This light pulsed red through the smoked crystal, and with it came a tremor deep in the floor. Far below, beyond stone and city, heretic guns opened. A field telephone Hest had clipped to the grill rang, though no one had connected the other end. Mara lifted it by reflex. Her face hardened. Fire Direction 12 reports heavy movement across St. Ballon and the lower Ash Road. Multiple columns. They are forming wide. Observers confused. Tower 49 requests correction. Enoch's eyes rolled toward the mirrors. The wheels around him began to turn. His fingers twitched in their iron rests, pulling chains by movements too small for ordinary work. Above us, lenses shifted. Prayer wheels clicked. The tower groaned into greater solidity around us, and for a breath I felt height under my feet so vast and impossible that my knees weakened. The anchorite spoke, and the old command voice returned through the ruin. Correction station, attend. Mara put the receiver to my ear. Fire Direction Room 12 roared below in the voice of Lena Arendt, who had taken command because I was absent and because competence outranks fear when shells are falling. Sergeant, we have assault indicators all across eastern dead ground. We need eyes. I looked at Enoch. He looked through the mirrors, beyond the wall, beyond our ignorance. Battery Judith, he said. All guns. Bearing 086. Range 5,200. Fuse delay. Mark, prepare smoke break shrapnel at 4007. Cosmos, high explosive, quick, walking north by 50. Reserve batteries to await my count. They have 3 waves. The second carries ladders. The third carries mouths. I relayed every word. The battle began while we stood inside the impossible tower. For the next hour, the chamber became the mind of the eastern wall. Reports came up through the field set, distorted by shell fire and panic. Lena repeated orders from below. Mara wrote corrections on her sleeve when paper ran out. Hest tried to stabilize the line and cursed like a dock worker whenever the signal bent around her instruments. Kreutz watched the shrine's load needles and shouted warnings when the tower thinned. Castigator Odran and Brother Malco prayed, not in the soft way of chapels, but hard and rhythmic, as if hauling rope. Enoch corrected. He saw through smoke, fog, deception, and angles that did not belong to human sight. He broke an assault wave before it reached the outer craters. He spared a knot of our own trench moles trapped under a collapsed listening post by shifting fire 20 paces left. He identified false standards, hidden mortars, crawling shield lines, sappers carrying black charges, and a procession of masked things that walked on all fours until shrapnel opened them and showed too many ribs. His voice weakened with every order, but his numbers remained perfect. Below, the guns obeyed. New Antioch's eastern wall fired as I had never heard it fire, not in panic, Not in waste, in terrible disciplined sequence. Batteries. Judith, Mark, Cosmas, Agnes, Basil, and the heavy mortars of St. Leonti's spur passed targets between them like craftsmen handing tools. The famous walls shook, the air in the shrine filled with dust fine as flour. The slits flashed white, red, black, white. Each impact outside arrived through the mirrors as a bloom of geometry in Enoch's ruined eyes. Then he missed a breath. It was small, a pause where no pause belonged. Kreutz shouted, "Load drop!" The chamber lurched. For an instant, the eastward slit nearest me changed. Instead of deadland, I saw nothing, not darkness, absence, a vertical gulf where wall, tower, and field refused to meet. Through that absence came a smell of open hot metal and faraway screaming. Then Enoch inhaled, the wheels snapped forward, and stone returned. He whispered, "Not yet." Castigator Odran seized my arm. "We must stop." "Stop what?" "This is killing him." I looked at the man in the shrine. He was already being killed. We only arrived in time to watch. The castigator's face twisted because he knew it was true. Another call came from below. Lena's voice cracked but held. "Sergeant, enemy reserves halting. Something is wrong with their right. They are looking toward us but not advancing." Enoch smiled. It was the smallest expression I had ever seen, and one of the saddest. "They feel it," he said. "They feel me thinning." Sergeant Hest asked, "Can we transfer the circuit? Copy the pattern? Use the mirrors?" "You may copy a song," Enoch said, "but not the throat that sings it." His eyes found Castigator Odran. "Rights now. No titles." The castigator swallowed. "You ask release? I ask truth. Release is only its shadow." Kreutz shook her head violently. "If he dies now, the sector opens during an assault." "If he does not," Brother Malco said, voice raw. "What are you proposing? Another century?" No one answered because the answer was too available. Duty wore its old clothes and stood among us. I wish I could write that I chose mercy immediately. I did not. I thought of the infantry quarters behind the wall. I thought of the ammunition lifts, the hospitals, the cisterns, the streets where children knew 77 before letters. I thought of the heretic army waiting outside with ladders and mouths. I thought of a ruined man asking not to be made a saint because sainthood would excuse us. Then I thought of his corrections across 300 years, each one an answer no one had thanked properly. Hold until relieved. Not hold forever. Until relieved. Perhaps that was the only loophole left. "If the tower fails," I asked him, "how long before they see?" "They will see as soon as I stop. They will understand a moment later. Their leaders will need minutes. Their bodies will need less." "Can you give us one final correction?" His eyes sharpened. "For the gap." "For the gap." Mara looked at me. She understood before the others. I took the field telephone. "Fire Direction 12, this is Marek. Prepare emergency pre-registration. All eastern batteries able to bear. Target designation, Void Gate. Temporary grid between 49 and 50. Stand by for final defensive fire." Lena did not ask what Void Gate meant. Bless her forever for that. "Standing by," she said. Corporal Kreutz grabbed my sleeve. "You will shell our own wall. The wall is already missing. The visible parapet is a mask. Can it hold if they rush it?" Her silence answered. Enoch's fingers moved. The shrine groaned. Mirrors turned toward impossible inward angles. For the first time, he was not looking out at the enemy. He was looking at the lie itself. "Record," he whispered. Mara raised her pencil. "Final correction. Tower 78 to all guns. The breach has no range because it begins under your boots. Use defensive line St. Barbara Black. Elevation minimum safe. Fuse quick for first rank, delay for second. Greek fire after third correction. Walk outward by 25 until no movement remains. Do not spare the mask. Do not trust the eye. Fire where the tower was. Mara wrote every word. Castigator Odran began the prayers for the dying. He did not call Enoch blessed. He did not call him venerable. He called him Brother Enoch, servant of God, soldier of New Antioch, man born of woman, sinner, sufferer, and witness. His voice broke once on the word man. Brother Malco gave water on a cloth. Most of it ran down the tubes. Enoch seemed grateful anyway. Sergeant Hest disconnected nothing. Corporal Kreutz touched no wheel. Pell removed his helmet. Nemeth wept openly. Mara stood at attention with the ledger pressed to her chest. I stepped close enough to see my own reflection in the wet ruin of Enoch's eye. "You are relieved," I said. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Enoch Vardan closed his eyes. The hooks tore through skin that had waited 3 centuries to make that movement. The sound was very small. His face changed. Not into peace exactly. Peace would have been too neat, too pretty for that room. It changed into the expression of a man who had finally been allowed to stop obeying an order. The tower died around him. It did not collapse. Collapse would have been mercifully physical. It faded by correction. Lines lost certainty. Iron ribs became shadow. The crown of lenses blurred into dust. The slits widened into absence, then narrowed, then vanished. The floor beneath us tilted between realities. Stone, air, stone, air. Through the eastern face, I saw the deadland swing like a lantern, and beyond it, the heretic army. They saw us. I knew the instant it happened. Across the field, thousands of heads turned. Standards paused. Ladders shifted. Leaders in black armor pointed. A great sound rose from their lines, not a cheer at first, but recognition. Hunger learning the shape of a door. The 78th tower thinned to a pale outline around us. Behind it, where New Antioch's wall should have stood, there was a gap. Not a crack, not a damaged parapet. A gap wide enough for companies to enter abreast, hidden for centuries by one man's forced attention. The visible curtain between Tower 49 and Tower 50 hung like stage scenery, unsupported in places, already tearing as truth returned. Walkways ended in air, pipes bent into nothing. A patrol of yeomen on the mast stumbled as the stones beneath them forgot their agreement and fell outward in a sheet. I heard them fall. I still hear them. Then Lena's voice screamed through the telephone. "Sergeant, we see it! God preserve us! We see open ground! Orders?" I put the receiver to my mouth. "Fire Void Gate! All batteries! Now!" The eastern wall fired into its own missing tooth. The first salvos struck the gap as heretic vanguards began to run. Shells burst where the tower had been, tearing air, masonry, and men into the same gray storm. The second salvo landed short by design, shredding the approach slope. The third walked outward and caught the heretics who had understood fastest. Greek fire followed, pouring liquid flame across the open ground until the absence shone orange. Inside the fading chamber, we tried to escape. Kreutz drove us toward the door, though the door now opened onto stair, smoke, and sometimes sky. Pell carried the acolyte after the boy froze. Sergeant Hest clutched her signal satchel with one hand and the old copper wire with the other until it dissolved between her fingers. Brother Malco and Castigator Odran lifted Enoch's body, but the shrine would not release him, or perhaps his body had become too much a part of it to move. The iron frame faded from the edges inward, taking tubes, wheels, hooks, and finally the ruined man with it. Castigator Odran refused to let go until Brother Malco struck his hands away. "He is relieved!" Malco shouted. "Do not make him hold you too!" We ran. The stair was breaking into contradictory lengths. At one turn we descended 10 steps and found the same landing. At another, a slit opened beside us onto empty air and showed heretics swarming below the burning line like ants around a dropped fruit. New Antioch's guns hammered without pause. Shell wind punched through gaps that had not existed when we climbed. Dust and prayers filled my mouth. Mara fell once. I hauled her up by the back of her coat. She had kept the ledger. I do not know why that mattered then, but it did. We burst from the hidden stair into the lower conduit as the refaced wall behind us cracked from floor to ceiling. Nemeth slammed the slab back because training made him close doors even at the end of reason. A moment later, the seam vanished. Not sealed. Vanished. Damp wall stood where the stair had been, old lichen unbroken across the stones. The wire was gone. We reached fire direction room 12, covered in dust and blood. Lena stood at the plotting table with Brother Malco's spare rosary wrapped around one wrist, commanding batteries in a voice hoarse enough to belong to someone twice her age. Toma worked 3 lines at once. Sergeant Mara, bleeding from her scalp, took her place without a word and opened the ledger to Enoch's final correction. For 6 hours, we held the gap with artillery. There is no elegant way to describe that fighting. The heretics came because they had seen the truth. We killed them because truth alone did not give them permission to enter. They advanced through fire, smoke, shattered mask stone, and the bodies of their own first waves. They brought trench shields, ladders, hooks, engines, chained beasts, sensors vomiting black vapor, and singers whose throats had been cut open and fitted with pipes. They died in rows. They died in heaps. They died close enough that our own guns had to depress below safe doctrine and fire canister along the base of the wall. Tower 49 lost its upper platform and kept reporting from the stair. Tower 50's sniper priests fired until their rifle barrels glowed dull red. Combat engineers under Corporal Kreutz dragged steel beams, carts, broken gun shields, chapel doors, and dead horses into the opening while shells burst around them. Trench clerics walked behind them chanting "Onward Christian Soldiers" in voices that had no music left, placing blessing after blessing on men who were too busy to be afraid. Lieutenant Aurelian committed the reserve infantry before anyone asked permission. Yeomen of 3 companies formed behind the gap with bayonets fixed and faces gray under ash. A unit of shock troops counterattacked through our own smoke to buy 12 minutes for an engineer crane to swing a boilerplate barricade into place. They bought 9. We spent those 9 as if they were gold. At one point, a heretic standard reached the inner lip. I saw it through a lower slit when I went above to correct a mortar whose line had failed. The standard was made of red hide stretched over a frame of finger bones. The man carrying it had no face, only a brass plate nailed smooth across the front of his head. He climbed over burning rubble while bullets sparked from his armor. Behind him came shapes with axes and hooks. Sister Calanthe, the blind sniper priest from Tower 50, stood on a cracked parapet with her veil burning at the edge. She raised her rifle without eyes and fired once. The standard bearer fell backward into his own men. The banner dipped. Battery mark landed a shell where it dipped. Afterward, there was no banner. By evening, the engineers had made something that could be defended if no one looked too hard at the word wall. Steel, stone, timber, wreckage. Field guns chained wheel to wheel, 2 overturned supply carts packed with rubble, and the cooling carcass of a heretic flame engine dragged into the breach by men who lost half their number doing it. It was ugly, temporary, and honest. No hidden tower held it. No sleepless man made it true. It stood because hands had put it there and because guns dared the enemy to approach. The heretics withdrew at dusk, though not far. They had seen the gap. Knowledge like that did not return to ignorance. By nightfall, their sappers were already at work beyond the burnt ground, and our mortars were firing by sound. The official report listed the action as the defense of the Eastern Mask. It stated that previously unknown structural weaknesses caused by ancient demonic subsidence had been revealed during enemy bombardment. It commended artillery responsiveness, engineer improvisation, clerical steadiness, and infantry courage. It named casualties where names were known. It did not mention Tower 78. It did not mention Brother Observer Enoch Vardon. It did not mention a living man sealed awake since the wall was built. Mara's ledger mentioned him. That ledger disappeared from the direction room 3 days later. Mara expected it. She had copied the pages twice. One copy went to Lieutenant Aurelian, who burned it in front of us and then recited it from memory to prove he had not wasted it. One copy went with Castigator Odran to the wall chaplaincy archives under a seal I was not cleared to see. The third she gave to me, folded inside an obsolete powder requisition. I have kept it hidden in places no clerk would respect enough to search. The city changed after that, though the posters did not. Publicly, New Antioch still had 77 towers. Children still learned the number. Priests still preached it, though some hesitated now between 70 and 7 as if their tongues had found a crack. The Eastern Gap acquired scaffolds, cranes, hoardings, false roofs, and 3 new batteries whose names changed weekly for security. Supply trains brought stone, steel, relic lime, African hardwood, Europa engines, and workers who were told they were reinforcing subsidence damage. Combat engineers worked under shell fire for months. Men died building a real wall where a man's gaze had been. The heretics never forgot. They tested that sector every week, sometimes with guns, sometimes with scouts, sometimes with prisoners driven ahead under lanterns, as before, sometimes with silence, which was worse. We answered with registered fire and the kind of vigilance that had once been outsourced to a single suffering soul. I remained in Fire Direction Room 12. Promotion was offered and refused badly enough that it stopped being offered. Mara became senior sergeant after shouting at a staff sergeant who tried to reorganize our ledgers. Lena earned her sergeant stripes during the second week of Gap defense, and never again let anyone call her temporary. Toma lost hearing in his left ear when a line box burst under induction, then learned to work the board by vibration. Brother Malco transferred permanently to the Eastern Batteries because, he said, some sins required witnesses more than absolution. Castigator Odran visited once, months later. He looked thinner. He told me that a small plaque had been placed in a sealed chapel under no tower. It read, Enoch Vardan, soldier of New Antioch, held until relieved. No saint, no title, no lie polished into comfort. I thanked him. He said, It is not enough. I said, No. Then we drank bitter coffee from tin cups while the guns spoke above us, because the war did not pause for adequate repentance. Years have passed since the 78th tower faded. I write this as an old man by artillery standards, which means I have survived long enough to become suspicious to younger soldiers. My hands ache in damp weather. My ears ring even in quiet rooms. I can no longer sleep through bells. When fog comes from the crater country, I wake before the alarms and listen for a line that no longer rings. Sometimes, in the hour before dawn, Fire Direction Room 12 becomes so still that the lamps seem to wait. The young plotters do not notice. They know the Eastern Gap as a fortified scar, ugly but real with proper embrasures and honest buttresses. They know nothing of the hidden stair. They know nothing of the chamber that looked from nowhere. They know the wall almost failed once because old masonry settled under bombardment. That is the story permitted to them. But I remember the voice. Correction station attend. I remember how calmly he spoke while saving men who would never know his name. I remember the perfect corrections, the hidden lines, the scratched tallies, the request not to be made into a saint or monster. I remember his eyes closing and the world admitting what had been missing. New Antioch's walls have still never been breached according to the official histories. Perhaps that is true. Perhaps a breach requires an enemy to break what was whole. Perhaps a gap hidden by suffering belongs to some other category of shame for which the clerks have not yet printed a form. I only know this. For 300 years, the eastern wall of the home of all our hopes was held by a man no parade honored, no relief replaced, and no doctrine could comfortably explain. When he died, the enemy saw the opening. When they saw it, we fired. When we fired, men stood in the absence and built stone under shell fall until the lie became a wall at last. That is the account I can give. If you ever serve on the eastern face between Tower 49 and Tower 50, you may notice that the guns there are laid with unusual care at dawn. You may notice the trench cleric pause before blessing the batteries. You may notice older artillerymen touch the signal conduit before they take the morning watch. You may even hear someone, usually when fog lies low behind St. Bellon Ridge, answer a telephone that has not rung. Do not mock them. Some corrections arrive late. Some debts are paid only after the man who carried them is gone. And some towers, though absent from every map, leave their numbers written in the habits of those who survived them.